They are only humans, the alien emperor said with a smile, and no one in the Grand Assembly stood up to tell him he had just signed the first page of his own empire's downfall. The laughter spread through the chamber like a wave, bouncing off towering crystal walls and polished black stone that had witnessed centuries of victories, treaties, and conquered civilizations. Thousands of delegates from every corner of known space watched from their elevated platforms as Emperor Kaler Vex slowly rose from his throne. His dark ceremonial armor reflected the pale glow of the enormous holographic galaxy suspended above the chamber, making him appear larger than life. For nearly 400 years, the Drakari Dominion had ruled through overwhelming military strength and political intimidation. Entire civilizations had surrendered without firing a single shot simply because Kaler had spoken their names. Today, his attention was fixed on one insignificant blue planet. Humanity, he announced, his voice echoing through every translation system in the hall, has mistaken our patience for weakness. The delegates listened in silence. Some leaned forward with curiosity. Others already looked away, convinced they knew exactly how this meeting would end. They build trade routes instead of warships. They negotiate instead of conquering. They waste resources protecting worlds that cannot repay them. Tell me. Kaler paused, letting a grin spread across his face. What threat could such a species possibly become? Another round of laughter swept across the assembly. Several ambassadors nodded in agreement. The Drakari Fleet Marshal, Zoros, folded his arms with quiet satisfaction. Everything was unfolding exactly as expected. Across the chamber, sitting behind a simple desk with nothing more than a leather notebook and a cup of untouched coffee, Ambassador Nathan Brooks listened without changing expression. He was 56 years old, silver beginning to show around his temples, dressed in an ordinary navy suit that looked almost out of place among jeweled robes and glowing ceremonial armor. He did not interrupt. He did not defend humanity. Instead, he uncapped a fountain pen and wrote a single sentence across the top of a blank page. Beside him, Senator Olivia Grant whispered under her breath, "Nathan, you cannot let him say this." Brooks kept writing. "He's speaking for the cameras," he replied quietly. "Let him finish." Olivia looked around the chamber. Every broadcast drone in the galaxy floated overhead. Billions of viewers were watching live from planets that had never even met a human before. Kaler spread both arms toward the audience. "The Dominion has no quarrel with insects beneath its feet. We simply refuse to pretend they are equals." The applause came this time. Measured, confident, certain. Brooks closed his notebook. His coffee had gone cold, but he finally lifted the cup anyway and took a slow sip before standing. The room gradually became quiet, expecting outrage, a desperate plea, perhaps even an emotional speech. Instead, Brooks adjusted the sleeve of his jacket and looked directly at the Emperor. "Your Majesty," he said with calm professionalism, "thank you for making your position perfectly clear." Kaler blinked once, almost disappointed. "That is all you have to say?" Brooks offered the faintest smile. "For today, yes." Without another word, he gathered his notebook, nodded politely to the assembly, and walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop him. Behind the heavy chamber doors, however, his expression changed for the first time all afternoon. He removed a secure satellite phone from his inside pocket and waited exactly one ring before the call connected. "Mr. President," Brooks said quietly. Everything was recorded. A familiar voice answered from Washington without hesitation. "Good." President Andrew Hale did not ask whether the meeting had gone well. He already knew. He had watched every second in silence. Brooks waited. Hale spoke only 4 more words. "Begin Phase 1 immediately." Nathan Brooks stepped into the secured diplomatic shuttle without looking back at the towering assembly building. The doors sealed with a soft hiss, shutting out the noise of the galaxy's most powerful politicians. For several long seconds, nobody inside the cabin spoke. Senator Olivia Grant stared through the window at the endless line of military escorts hovering above the capital city. "They planned this," she finally whispered. Every word. Brooks loosened his tie just enough to breathe comfortably again. Of course they did. Then why did they broadcast it? Brooks looked toward the stars outside. Because they wanted every civilization watching to believe Earth accepted its place. Thousands of light years away, inside the underground strategic operations center beneath Washington, President Andrew Hale stood before a massive digital map that displayed every known trade route connecting Earth to the rest of civilized space. Around him, military officers, economic advisors, intelligence analysts, and civilian cabinet members waited for instructions. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody panicked. Hale picked up a folder stamped with a simple phrase in black ink. Phase 1. He opened it without ceremony. Status. General Mason Carter stepped forward first. The 1st, 3rd, and 7th Fleets have departed under humanitarian deployment orders. Public records show disaster relief exercises. Actual destinations remain compartmentalized. Hale nodded once. Logistics. A woman wearing work clothes instead of a military uniform adjusted her glasses before answering. Emily Dawson had spent 20 years managing freight movement across North America before joining the Department of Defense. Commercial cargo traffic has increased 22% over the last 72 hours. Nobody has questioned it because every shipment looks routine. Good. Hale turned toward another screen. Energy reserves? Above projections. Medical supplies? Already distributed. Food reserves? Enough for 18 months without imports. Every answer sounded ordinary, almost boring. That was exactly the point. Earth was not mobilizing through dramatic speeches or emergency broadcasts. It was preparing the same way families stocked groceries before a hurricane. Quietly, methodically. Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion flagship Iron Crown, Fleet Marshal Zoros reviewed surveillance reports with growing amusement. They are shipping construction materials, one intelligence officer reported. Agricultural equipment. Medical inventories. Civilian transport activity has increased significantly. Zoros chuckled. Exactly what frightened civilizations always do. Another officer hesitated. There has also been unusual movement around Terran shipyards. Maintenance. Zoros answered before the officer could finish. Humans love maintenance reports. Even Emperor Kaler barely glanced at the files delivered to his throne room. Have they requested negotiations? He asked. No, Your Majesty. Economic concessions? No. Military alliance? None. Kaler smiled. Excellent. They are learning. Back on Earth, Brooks finally entered the Strategic Operations Center nearly 16 hours after leaving the assembly. He found President Hale standing alone beside the operations map. You have not gone home, Brooks observed. Hale gave a tired smile. Neither have you. Brooks placed the leather notebook onto the table. He wanted us angry. Were you? Brooks thought about the laughter echoing through the assembly. He remembered dozens of ambassadors looking away instead of speaking up. He remembered the cameras recording every second. For about 5 seconds, he admitted. Then I realized something. Hale folded his arms. What? Brooks tapped the notebook. Empires that laugh at ordinary people usually stop paying attention to them. Before Hale could answer, every monitor inside the operations center flashed amber. A communications officer turned from her console, her face suddenly pale. Mr. President, we just received confirmation. The room fell completely silent. The Dominion has established military inspection checkpoints along 3 major civilian trade corridors. General Carter looked up slowly. Those routes carry American and Allied supply ships every single day. Hale stared at the blinking map as 3 bright red symbols appeared closer to Earth than anyone had expected. Then he spoke with the same calm voice Brooks had heard over the secure phone hours earlier. Inform every civilian captain to remain calm. Carter looked directly at him. And our fleets. Hale's eyes never left the screen. Keep them exactly where they are. Let the Dominion believe those checkpoints are working. Then another alert appeared. This time it came from the outer edge of the Soul Trade Network. An unidentified Dominion task force had just changed course toward a Terran humanitarian convoy carrying families, doctors, engineers, and relief supplies, and every person inside the room understood that the next move would determine whether history remembered this as a diplomatic crisis or the first irreversible step toward war. The humanitarian convoy moved through the Soul Trade Corridor exactly on schedule, just as it had every Tuesday for the past 8 years. 12 white transport ships drifted in orderly formation, their hulls marked with medical symbols, agricultural registry numbers, and civilian relief emblems recognized throughout known space. Captain Rebecca Lawson stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, Harmony, watching stars glide across the forward display while sipping coffee that had already gone cold. She had spent 24 years hauling supplies instead of weapons, and she intended to retire doing exactly that. Distance to inspection zone, she asked. 300 miles, her navigator replied. Dominion patrols are holding position. Rebecca nodded slowly. Open every cargo manifest. I do not want surprises. Already transmitted, Captain. The convoy continued forward without changing course. There were children aboard several transports, engineers assigned to remote colonies, volunteer doctors, construction crews, and enough medical equipment to supply 3 frontier settlements for an entire year. Nobody expected trouble. Back in Washington, President Andrew Hale watched the convoy's telemetry update in real time. General Mason Carter folded his arms. Our escorts are staying outside sensor range. Hale answered without looking away from the display. Good. Senator Olivia Grant looked uneasy. Should not someone tell those families what is happening? Brooks quietly shook his head. If they panic, the Dominion wins before making a single decision. Hundreds of light years away, Fleet Marshal Zoros stood aboard the Dominion cruiser Sovereign Spear as the convoy entered scanner range. Interesting, he muttered. His executive officer studied the incoming data. No weapon signatures beyond legal civilian requirements. Exactly, Zoros smiled. They are trying very hard to appear harmless. The officer hesitated. Perhaps they actually are. Zoros looked at him with mild disappointment. Every civilization hides behind trade before it hides behind soldiers. The Dominion cruisers shifted into perfect formation, blocking the corridor without firing a single shot. Their enormous silhouettes filled every forward screen aboard the Harmony. Rebecca took a slow breath. Incoming transmission. Put them through. A calm synthetic voice filled every bridge. Terran convoy. By order of the Dominion Security Authority, all civilian vessels will prepare for mandatory inspection. Disable propulsion systems and await boarding authorization. Rebecca exchanged a glance with her first officer. That route is protected by interstellar commerce agreements. We know. The officer answered quietly. So do they. Rebecca pressed the transmitter. This is Captain Rebecca Lawson of the humanitarian vessel Harmony. We are transporting civilian personnel and emergency supplies under registered council permits. We respectfully request immediate passage. Several seconds passed before another voice answered, deeper this time. Your request has been acknowledged. The channel went silent again. Inside the Dominion flagship, Zoros watched the Terran ships hold formation instead of turning away. Confident, he observed. Or disciplined, his executive officer replied. Zoros dismissed the thought with a wave. Discipline breaks eventually. Back aboard the Harmony, young volunteer Dr. Melissa Turner walked onto the bridge carrying a tablet. Captain, some of the children are asking why we stopped. Rebecca forced a reassuring smile. Tell them traffic is backed up. Melissa studied her face. Is that true? Rebecca looked through the viewport at the motionless Dominion cruisers. It is true enough. Before anyone could speak again, every monitor flashed with a new encrypted message from Earth Command. It contained only one sentence. Maintain course. Do not provoke. You are not alone. Rebecca read it twice before quietly deleting the transmission. She smiled for the first time in nearly an hour. Helm, she said calmly. Hold position. Across the corridor, Zoros narrowed his eyes. They are calmer than they should be. At that exact moment, one of his intelligence officers hurried onto the bridge carrying a fresh sensor report. Marshal, we may have a problem. Zoros turned. Explain. The officer swallowed hard before answering. Long-range scans just detected dozens of Terran civilian freighters leaving ports across multiple sectors at exactly the same time, and none of them are traveling toward commercial destinations. The report reached Fleet Marshal Zoros less than 2 minutes after the first anomaly appeared. He read it once, frowned, and read it again. Civilian freighters? He asked. Confirmed, the intelligence officer replied. 83 vessels have departed from shipyards across Terran space within the last 45 minutes. None have filed commercial destinations. Zoros leaned over the tactical display. Intercept their communications. There are no transmissions. Track their cargo. Standard shipping containers, according to customs records. Zoros slowly smiled. Then they are trying to frighten us with logistics. Continue the inspections. Aboard the Harmony, Captain Rebecca Lawson watched the Dominion cruisers begin maneuvering closer. Massive inspection craft detached from their carriers and drifted toward the convoy in precise formation. Her first officer looked at the tactical display. They are bringing in boarding teams. Rebecca remained calm. Open every cargo bay on remote cameras. Let them see exactly what we are carrying. Crates of medical equipment, water purification systems, portable shelters, farming machinery, and children's classroom supplies appeared across the shared inspection feed. There was nothing hidden, nothing threatening. A Dominion commander appeared on the main screen, his expression unreadable. Your manifests match our preliminary scans. Rebecca folded her hands behind her back. Then we request permission to continue our mission. The commander did not answer immediately. Instead, another message appeared on his console. His eyes shifted as he read it. Stand by. The transmission ended without explanation. Deep beneath the White House, President Andrew Hale entered the operations room carrying a thin black folder. General Mason Carter was already studying dozens of blinking icons scattered across the digital star map. Nathan Brooks stood beside him, unusually quiet. What changed? Hale asked. Carter enlarged the display. The Dominion expanded inspections to 6 additional corridors during the last 20 minutes. Commercial traffic across the region has dropped nearly 60%. Brooks looked toward Hale. They are squeezing every artery leading back to Earth. Hale nodded once. Exactly what we expected. Carter glanced at him. Then it is time. Hale opened the folder and signed a single authorization page. Begin civilian redeployment. Within seconds, encrypted orders raced across Earth's secure communications network. Cargo pilots, tug operators, shipyard managers, and freight coordinators received routine-looking instructions that redirected hundreds of ordinary vessels. From orbit, nothing appeared unusual. Freighters continued departing. Tankers continued docking. Maintenance crews continued working. Yet every movement fit into a much larger pattern only a handful of people understood. On the bridge of the Dominion flagship, another alarm interrupted Zaros's confidence. Marshal, the sensor officer called out. The civilian convoy is no longer our only concern. Report. Terran merchant traffic has increased simultaneously near 17 separate sectors. None of the routes make economic sense. Zaros crossed his arms. Diversions? Perhaps. The officer hesitated before continuing. But every convoy is staying just outside the legal distance that would allow us to inspect them under council law. For the first time that day, Zaros stopped smiling. They read the treaty. Every article. The officer answered quietly. Before Zaros could respond, another transmission arrived directly from Emperor Kaler. His image appeared over the bridge. Marshal, why has this operation taken so long? The humans are delaying through legal procedure, Your Majesty. Kaler dismissed the explanation with a wave. Then increase pressure. Push them until they make a mistake. Understood. Minutes later, Dominion patrol ships accelerated toward the nearest Terran convoy, tightening formation until warning lights illuminated every bridge aboard the civilian vessels. Captain Rebecca Lawson watched the distance shrink on her display. Her helmsman tightened his grip. Captain, they are forcing us out of the corridor. Rebecca took one slow breath before answering. Hold our course. Collision alarms are active. Hold our course. The Dominion ships continued advancing, expecting the slower humanitarian convoy to yield first. Every second stretched longer than the last as thousands of civilian passengers waited in complete silence. Then, just before the legal safety boundary was crossed, the Dominion formation abruptly altered course by less than 50 feet, avoiding the encounter at the last possible moment. Cheers did not erupt aboard the Harmony. Nobody celebrated. Rebecca simply exhaled and looked toward the stars ahead. Somewhere beyond them, hundreds of ordinary Terran freighters were quietly moving into position, and although they carried no weapons anyone could see, General Mason Carter watched their synchronized routes appear across the strategic map until they formed a pattern that made every officer in the room fall silent. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 had already begun. The pattern became impossible to ignore after 48 hours. Across 17 sectors, Terran cargo traffic moved with perfect discipline but without any obvious purpose. Freighters carrying grain crossed paths with medical transports. Fuel tankers docked, unloaded only half their cargo, and departed again. Construction barges appeared near abandoned stations before quietly disappearing into deep space. To outside observers it looked inefficient, even chaotic. Inside the Dominion War Command, however, analysts were beginning to lose confidence in every prediction they had made. Fleet Marshal Zuros stood before a wall-sized tactical display as new reports streamed in faster than his staff could organize them. "Explain it to me one more time," he said. The senior intelligence officer took a slow breath. "Every individual movement follows commercial law. Every convoy has valid documentation. Every captain answers inspection requests. Nothing violates council regulations. Then why are they doing it?" The officer hesitated. "We do not know." Zaro stared at the map. He had spent his entire military career studying civilizations before conquering them. Strong enemies gathered fleets. Weak enemies begged for peace. Humanity was doing neither. On Earth, General Mason Carter walked through mission control without speaking. Hundreds of specialists monitored shipping lanes, orbital docks, communications traffic, and civilian logistics. There were no dramatic countdowns. No flashing red alarms. Just ordinary people quietly solving thousands of small problems. Emily Dawson looked up from her terminal. "Freighter groups 7 and 11 have completed repositioning." Carter nodded. "Passenger transfers?" "Finished 30 minutes early." "Excellent." Nathan Brooks entered carrying another cup of coffee. "The Assembly has requested another diplomatic meeting." Carter smiled for the first time all week. "Already?" Brooks shrugged. "Apparently, several member worlds are asking why the Dominion keeps disrupting trade." President Andrew Hale joined them moments later. "Will they accuse us?" Brooks shook his head. "They cannot. We have followed every regulation they ever wrote." Hale looked toward the enormous tactical display where hundreds of blue icons slowly shifted into a new formation. "Good. Keep giving them exactly what they expect." Meanwhile, aboard the Iron Crown, Emperor Kaler reviewed economic projections with growing irritation. His finance minister spoke carefully. "Trade tariffs are no longer producing the expected pressure." "Why?" Kaler demanded. "Terran exports have actually increased." "Impossible. Not according to the numbers." Another advisor stepped forward. "Several neutral worlds have started purchasing directly from Earth because Dominion inspection delays have disrupted our own commercial reliability." Kaler slowly lowered the report onto his desk. "So our inspections are helping them?" Nobody answered. The silence was answer enough. At the edge of the Soul Trade Corridor, Captain Rebecca Lawson watched the last Dominion inspection vessel finally clear her convoy. "Permission to resume normal speed?" her helmsman asked. Rebecca smiled faintly. "Take us home." The 12 humanitarian ships accelerated together, disappearing into jump space exactly as scheduled. Melissa Turner walked onto the bridge carrying a message tablet. "Captain, every colony we were supposed to reach has already confirmed receiving replacement supplies." Rebecca frowned. "Already? We have not delivered anything yet." Melissa looked just as confused. "That is what surprised me." Rebecca immediately opened the secure transmission. Every destination had indeed reported successful deliveries hours earlier. Different ships, different routes, different arrival times. She quietly laughed to herself. "General Carter," she whispered, "you have been moving pieces long before anyone noticed the board." Back inside Dominion headquarters, another emergency briefing interrupted Fleet Marshal Zuros. This time the officer delivering the report looked genuinely unsettled. "Marshal, our reconnaissance network has completed a full logistics analysis. Finally, the Terrans are no longer supplying individual colonies." Zuros narrowed his eyes. "Then what are they supplying?" The officer enlarged the map until hundreds of blue shipping routes connected into a single web stretching across the frontier. Each convoy has been supporting the next one. Every shipment has strengthened another route. Without firing a single shot, humanity has quietly built the largest self-sustaining supply network ever recorded beyond Dominion control. Zuros felt something unfamiliar settle over the bridge. It was not fear. Not yet. But for the first time since the campaign began, he realized he was no longer watching civilians react to pressure. He was watching an entire civilization execute a plan that had never depended on his decisions in the first place. General Mason Carter stood alone in the observation gallery overlooking Orbital Dock 12, his hands resting quietly behind his back as dozens of civilian freighters slipped away from their berths with perfect timing. From above, the traffic looked almost peaceful. Tugboats guided enormous cargo ships into formation, while maintenance drones completed routine inspections and fuel crews moved from vessel to vessel as though nothing unusual had happened. Nathan Brooks walked beside him and watched the steady stream of departures. "The Dominion finally understands we were preparing something," he said. Carter nodded without taking his eyes off the window. "Understanding is not the same as stopping it." Brooks smiled faintly. "You expected they would react. I was counting on it." Thousands of light years away, Fleet Marshal Zuros entered the Imperial War Chamber carrying the latest intelligence reports. Emperor Kaler read the first page, then threw it onto the table. "Enough of these shipping records." His voice echoed through the chamber. "If humanity hides behind commerce, remove commerce." Zaros remained silent for several seconds. "Your Majesty, such an order would affect neutral systems." Kaler looked directly at him. "Then let them complain. They fear us more than they fear economic delays." The Emperor turned toward the tactical display and extended one clawed hand across the glowing star map. "Seal every major corridor leading towards Sol. No cargo enters. No cargo leaves without Dominion approval." Several advisors exchanged uneasy glances. One finally gathered enough courage to speak. "Your Majesty, that would exceed Council authority." Kaler did not even look at him. "The Council has never stopped us before." Within the hour, Dominion fleets accelerated across the frontier. Massive cruisers repositioned themselves around the busiest commercial routes while inspection stations transformed into military blockades. Hundreds of merchant captains suddenly found themselves ordered to hold position indefinitely. News spread across the galaxy faster than any official announcement. Stock markets reacted first. Freight insurers suspended contracts. Independent colonies began reporting shortages of replacement machinery and industrial components. Inside the Strategic Operations Center beneath Washington, warning indicators flashed across every logistics screen. Emily Dawson quickly reviewed the incoming reports before looking toward President Andrew Hale. They finally did it. Hale quietly folded his reading glasses and placed them on the table. How extensive? 9 major corridors completely restricted. 14 secondary routes under military supervision. General Carter looked toward the digital map without the slightest sign of concern. Response. Emily hesitated. "Civilian transport associations are requesting instructions." Hale answered before anyone else could speak. "Tell every captain to follow international law exactly as written." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Nothing more?" Hale looked at him calmly. "Nothing more." On the bridge of the merchant vessel Horizon Wind, veteran Captain Michael Donovan received the encrypted order while Dominion cruisers loomed less than 2 miles away. His first officer looked nervous. "Sir, if we stop here much longer, our delivery deadline is impossible." Donovan smiled as though discussing weekend traffic back home. "Read the message again." The younger officer scanned the text. "Follow international law exactly as written." Donovan nodded. "Then that is exactly what we will do." One by one, Terran freighters across every restricted corridor reduced speed, transmitted complete legal compliance notices, and quietly anchored themselves wherever regulations allowed. None attempted to force passage. None challenged Dominion authority. Instead, thousands of civilian ships simply stopped moving, creating an enormous commercial standstill that spread far beyond human territory. Less than 6 hours later, emergency requests flooded the Dominion command network from allied worlds whose factories depended on those same shipping lanes. Fleet Marshal Zaros stared at the endless stream of incoming complaints as another officer rushed onto the bridge. "Marshal, neutral governments are demanding immediate explanations. Their own economies are beginning to stall." Zaros slowly turned toward the tactical display where every blocked corridor had become a chain reaction reaching deeper into Dominion space than anyone had predicted. He finally understood the trap. Humanity had never intended to break the blockade. They had simply allowed the blockade to expose how many worlds depended on Earth to keep the galaxy running. Before he could formulate a response, another encrypted transmission arrived from the Imperial Palace, marked with the Emperor's highest priority. Zaros opened it, read the first line, and his expression hardened. Kaler had issued a new command that would leave no room for diplomacy, and if carried out, there would be no easy path back for either civilization. Fleet Marshal Zaros read the Emperor's order twice before lowering the display. The bridge around him remained silent. Every senior officer understood exactly what those few lines meant. The Dominion would no longer settle for inspections and blockades. Effective immediately, every Terran civilian vessel traveling beyond Sol would lose its protected commercial status until further notice. It was a legal maneuver wrapped in imperial authority, one that would allow Dominion forces to detain ships almost anywhere they pleased. Zaros slowly looked around the bridge. Transmit the directive. His executive officer hesitated. Marshal, this will affect millions of civilians across neutral space. Zaros closed his eyes for a brief moment. I know. Within hours, emergency bulletins spread across the galaxy. Merchant captains rerouted their voyages. Insurance companies suspended coverage for entire sectors. Governors on distant colonies began calculating how long their food processors, hospitals, and power stations could operate without Terran replacement parts. The answers were measured in days, not months. Deep beneath Washington, the Strategic Operations Center remained surprisingly quiet. President Andrew Hale listened as advisors summarized the situation. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. When the final report ended, Hale turned toward Nathan Brooks. How long until the Assembly realizes who is really being squeezed? Brooks answered without checking his notes. Some already have. As if on cue, another secure line activated. Olivia Grant appeared on the main screen from the Galactic Assembly, exhaustion visible across her face. Mr. President, I have ambassadors waiting outside my office from 12 neutral governments. Hale remained composed. What do they want? Olivia gave a tired laugh. They want to know how quickly Earth can restore shipping if the Dominion stands down. General Mason Carter folded his arms. Interesting. Olivia nodded. Nobody is asking how to defeat humanity anymore. They are asking how to keep doing business with us. Half a galaxy away, Emperor Kaler received similar updates, but the tone inside the Imperial Palace was very different. One advisor stepped forward carrying another stack of economic reports. Your Majesty, industrial production has slowed across 3 allied sectors. Kaler barely glanced at the documents. Temporary inconvenience. Another minister cleared his throat. Respectfully, several member worlds are threatening to suspend military contributions unless trade resumes. Kaler's expression hardened. Then remind them who protects their borders. Before anyone could respond, another official entered the chamber carrying an urgent transmission. The Assembly has called an emergency session. Kaler smiled with absolute confidence. Finally, they are ready to condemn Earth. Meanwhile, the enormous Assembly Hall filled faster than anyone could remember. Delegates from hundreds of civilizations gathered beneath the great holographic galaxy, while reporters crowded every observation platform. Nathan Brooks entered wearing the same Navy suit he had worn during the Emperor's public mockery days earlier. Several ambassadors quietly greeted him this time. Others simply nodded with unexpected respect. Brooks noticed the change, but said nothing. Across the chamber, Fleet Marshal Zaros arrived to represent the Dominion. As their eyes met, neither man smiled. Neither looked away. The session began. The Speaker of the Assembly struck the ceremonial staff against the marble floor. We are gathered to address the growing crisis affecting interstellar commerce. Kaler rose before anyone else could speak. The responsibility belongs entirely to humanity. Murmurs spread through the hall. Then, one after another, representatives from neutral systems requested permission to address the chamber. The first was a governor whose agricultural exports depended on Terran logistics. The second represented frontier hospitals supplied by Earth. The third commanded a mining coalition that relied on human engineering crews. None defended the Dominion. None accused Earth. They all asked the same question. When will normal trade return? The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Kaler's confident expression faded just enough for Zaros to notice. The Emperor had expected fear. Instead, he was facing frustration from governments that suddenly realized the quiet human economy had become the backbone of half the galaxy. Then the speaker turned toward Nathan Brooks. Ambassador, the Assembly requests humanity's position. Brooks stood slowly, placed both hands on the podium, and looked across the crowded chamber before speaking just one calm sentence. Earth has not interrupted a single shipment. Every delegate froze. Then Brooks reached into his briefcase and placed a thick collection of verified shipping records onto the central table, evidence that every Terran convoy had obeyed every law while the Dominion itself had created the crisis. And as thousands of cameras zoomed in on the documents, Fleet Marshal Zaros realized the most dangerous battle of the entire conflict had just begun, not in space, but in front of the whole galaxy. The assembly chamber remained so quiet that the faint hum of the translation systems became impossible to ignore. Hundreds of delegates stared at the stack of authenticated shipping records resting in front of Nathan Brooks. Every page had been verified by the Assembly's own commercial registry. Every route matched public navigation logs. Every inspection report carried Dominion authorization codes. Brooks did not need to argue. The documents were doing it for him. Emperor Kaler rose slowly from his seat, refusing to let uncertainty show on his face. "Paper does not change reality," he declared. "The disruption began when humanity reorganized its shipping network." Brooks nodded politely. "That is correct." A ripple moved through the chamber. Even Kaler looked surprised by the answer. Brooks continued in the same calm voice. "We reorganized because your government announced inspections that delayed civilian commerce. Every adjustment we made was legal, publicly declared, and fully transparent." He gently placed another file onto the central table. "Those records are available to every member government." The speaker accepted the file and immediately transmitted it to every delegate. Within seconds, personal displays throughout the chamber filled with timelines, permits, inspection notices, and economic reports. Governor after governor began comparing dates. One representative stood first. The Dominion closed the corridors before humanity redirected supply routes. Another delegate followed. Earth warned commercial partners to expect delays without violating a single treaty. A third voice echoed from the upper gallery. "My system continued receiving medical shipments because Terran carriers established alternate logistics months ago." Fleet Marshal Zaros remained perfectly still, but inside he felt the pieces locking together. Humanity had never been improvising. They had quietly built redundancy into every essential route long before the first inspection checkpoint appeared. They had assumed someone would eventually try to squeeze them. The only thing they had not known was who. Back beneath Washington, President Andrew Hale watched the assembly broadcast with General Mason Carter and Olivia Grant connected through secure communications. Carter crossed his arms. "They are finally seeing the whole picture." Hale answered quietly. "Not yet." Brooks still had one move left. Across the chamber, Kaler struck the arm of his throne with visible frustration. "Enough legal theater. The Dominion still controls the strongest fleet in known space." Brooks met his eyes without raising his voice. "No one has questioned your fleet. Then what exactly are you suggesting?" Brooks looked around the room before answering. "Strength is measured by what happens when people stop trusting you." The chamber fell silent again. At that exact moment, the Assembly's Economic Monitoring Network issued an automated alert. Large holographic charts appeared above the delegates. One after another, neutral governments had begun redirecting new commercial contracts away from Dominion-controlled routes and toward independent logistics agreements coordinated through Earth and its partners. Nobody had ordered them to do it. They had simply concluded that human supply chains were more reliable. Kaler watched the numbers change in real time. Trade volume shifted. Insurance ratings shifted. Shipping registrations shifted. Not because of fear, but because of confidence. Zaros quietly stepped closer to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, if this continues, we will still possess the largest fleet." Kaler did not answer. Zaros finished the thought anyway. "But fewer worlds will choose to depend on us." Before anyone else could speak, another priority transmission reached the Assembly from Dominion Frontier Command. A senior officer appeared on the central display. "Emergency report. Multiple allied governors have requested immediate permission to negotiate directly with Earth regarding civilian supply agreements. They are asking whether humanity will continue deliveries regardless of political alignment." Every camera in the chamber turned toward Nathan Brooks. He did not celebrate. He did not smile. He simply answered with the same steady voice he had used since the beginning. "Earth has never stopped delivering food, medicine, or emergency aid to civilians. We do not punish ordinary families for political decisions made by governments." The words landed harder than any threat ever could. Delegates who had laughed only days earlier now looked at humanity through entirely different eyes. Kaler slowly sat back down, realizing that the battle he believed would prove human weakness had instead revealed something far more dangerous. Humanity had not won by forcing the galaxy to fear them. They had won by giving the galaxy a reason to trust them. And as another secure message arrived on President Hale's desk requesting an immediate private meeting from the Imperial Palace itself, everyone in Washington understood the next conversation would decide whether the crisis ended in peace or entered its final and most decisive chapter. The private meeting took place without cameras, reporters, or ceremonial guards. Inside a quiet conference chamber overlooking the stars, President Andrew Hale stood beside a simple table with Nathan Brooks and General Mason Carter at his side. Across from them sat Emperor Kaler Vex and Fleet Marshal Zuros. There were no raised voices, no threats, just four leaders who understood that entire civilizations were waiting for what happened next. Kaler broke the silence first. You planned for this long before our fleets entered your trade routes. Hale nodded once. Yes. You expected us to attack. No, Hale answered. We expected someone would eventually mistake restraint for weakness. Kaler studied the human president for several long seconds. Then why did you not respond with force? Hale rested both hands lightly on the table. Because force is expensive. Trust is priceless. The words lingered in the room. Zaros lowered his eyes for the first time since the crisis began. He finally understood why every military calculation had failed. The Dominion had measured ships, weapons, and territory. Humanity had measured relationships, reliability, and time. Brooks quietly slid a thin folder across the table. These are our conditions. Kaler opened it. There were no demands for tribute, no request for conquered worlds, no humiliation written into the agreement. The document called for unrestricted civilian trade, equal navigation rights, independent oversight of commercial inspections, and guaranteed protection for humanitarian convoys regardless of political alliances. Kaler looked up in disbelief. You are asking for less than you could demand. Carter finally spoke. We are asking for exactly what keeps ordinary people alive. The Emperor slowly closed the folder. Outside the conference room, the news spread before signatures were even dry. Dominion blockade fleets received withdrawal orders. Civilian corridors reopened one after another. Freighters that had waited for days quietly resumed their journeys. Hospitals received delayed equipment. Frontier colonies restarted construction projects. Farmers harvested crops that finally had somewhere to go. There were no victory parades on Earth. No fireworks lit the skies above Washington. Captain Rebecca Lawson simply guided the Harmony through the same corridor that had once been blocked and smiled as children aboard the transport pressed their faces against the observation windows, unaware they had become part of history. Melissa Turner walked onto the bridge holding a fresh transmission. Captain, another convoy just crossed the frontier. Rebecca glanced at the message. From where? The Dominion. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Medical supplies. She smiled quietly. Then clear them for priority passage. Months later, Fleet Marshal Zuros visited the assembly alone. As he crossed the great chamber, he noticed something that had never happened before. Human delegates were no longer sitting by themselves. Representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered around Nathan Brooks, asking questions, exchanging ideas, and planning new partnerships. Nobody laughed when humanity spoke anymore. They listened. Zaros stopped beside Brooks before leaving the chamber. May I ask you something? Brooks nodded. When the Emperor mocked your people that day, were you angry? Brooks thought for a moment before answering. For a few seconds. And after that, Brooks smiled gently. After that, I realized something my grandfather taught me when I was a boy. Zaros waited. Brooks looked toward the crowded assembly where old rivals now discussed shared futures instead of new conflicts. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest one. The strongest person is usually the one who can afford to stay calm. Zaros stood in silence as those words settled in. Years later, historians would write thousands of pages about the crisis. Some would call it an economic victory. Others would describe it as a diplomatic masterpiece or a strategic triumph. They would debate fleets, treaties, logistics, and politics. But the people who had lived through those days remembered something much simpler. They remembered that an empire had believed respect could be demanded through fear, while humanity proved that real strength was earned by protecting others even when it would have been easier to seek revenge. In the end, the galaxy did not change because one civilization became stronger than another. It changed because one civilization refused to become weaker than its own principles. And from that day forward, whenever someone dismissed Earth as harmless, there was always another voice somewhere in the room that quietly answered, be careful. They are peaceful by choice, and there is a difference between choosing peace and lacking the strength to defend it.